Just finished with our principals as they are still in training, and I'm so glad that you could join us this morning. I'll share with you a little bit about the structure. So long time no see, the faces on this screen. I will first mention a couple of items that have happened since we last talked. As you all know, we were strongly supporting and looking forward to having a graduation ceremony. Our meeting with the health department last Wednesday, they shared verbally and then in writing that they do not, in writing because I wrote them to ask to better help me understand, can I proceed with a graduation ceremony or not? And that was my question to them. I'm happy to forward you their response. And the response was that they do not encourage, and they shared it in our meeting, they in fact strongly discourage any group gatherings from occurring between now and certainly the foreseeable time at that point from when school was scheduled to start, which would have been August 12th for us and the 13th for some other districts. So they shared no barbecues, no gatherings, no parent events, no student events, no group gatherings. They also shared that they could not make us close down a gathering. They could not cancel it for us, but they could only give us their guidance, and then it's up to us to determine if we would accept that. We are looking at taking all of the health guidelines that are given to us and implementing them in a way that the health department says we should, because we believe those are the experts that we need to be following. If something is literally impossible to do, then we'll work through that. So if they say wear masks, we're wearing masks. If they say social distance, we're social distancing. I share that with you so then you know that Topeka could look different from some other places potentially, but we will turn to the health department guideline and then send it to you if you'd like to see the guideline, or for DCAC's purpose, if you'd like to see the conversation or know whom I've spoken with, just so we all can be really transparent and know why we're doing what we're doing. So it's our responsibility to open or close, but they are giving us guidance and giving us their strong recommendations to the best of their ability. Then it's up to superintendents to determine what to do with that, okay? So I share that with you. I am sorry for that change, but the earlier we tell people, the more they can prepare for receiving that information. And we did purchase all of the students a keepsake, which is the pictures of all of their class in a booklet that's made into a bit of a magazine. We are going to work through our principals to get that out to our students, whether we mail that or whether there's a schedule on how they get that, we'll figure that piece out. So principals are meeting right now regarding those matters, as well as the calendar. As you also know, the calendar is another item in the last 48 hours. That's another change from when we last spoke. So very briefly, and then we'll jump into our plan. We all learned about that at the same time. And so in learning about that, I contacted along with the deputy superintendent, our teachers association. It's 18 student contact days is what that comes down to. With those 18 student contact days, we are working with our teachers association and looking at how we can potentially maintain the current calendar that we have and modify some of the days we would normally have had off to add up to 18 days, which may include things like looking potentially at, you won't need the October parent conference if we're starting in mid-September. You may not necessarily need that full week out for Thanksgiving, which we've never had. This would have been the first year for the full week. So they're looking at some of the professional development days that we normally would have had. That October professional development day, the teachers would have just had professional development in August, so they may not need that. So we're really looking at days that can be added in the calendar that could be used. They are asked to give me a proposal by the beginning of next week, so we can, as quickly as possible, look at how do we address this. So we don't have parents thinking that school's going to start later or go through June, or so we're going to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can. All right, so that's the calendar and that's graduation, and I appreciate your continued patience. All right, so as we get started, this is like a fireside chat. I kind of wanted a picture of a fireplace at the bottom somewhere. So it's like we're gathering around with the DCAC experts and folks that have given so much time, and I wanted you to get a sneak peek at the plan, which has not been publicly posted yet. I want to talk through your questions. This is Facebook Live for our parent kind of small coffee group to just talk about things that are on your mind. If other people have questions and they're looking at Facebook Live, I'm going to stop and have the DCAC officers introduce themselves. If you are open to receiving email and you want to give your email address and you want people to send you questions, feel free to do that. We certainly will have one of our communications team members as well giving their email address so that parents can send them that. If they just want to post something on Facebook, those questions are being sent in from Dr. Gray so that we can also answer those live. So welcome to our live DCAC debrief and dialogue about our reopening plan. I'm going to stop first so you can introduce yourself to those folks watching Facebook. We'll start with Ms. Colette, our president.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Colette, and I am the current DCAC president. I represent actually McEachran and French on DCAC. And you can, my email address is Jetsons, so like the cartoon 0406@yahoo.com if you'd like to reach out to me. Thank you.
And we're going to type that in the chat, the email addresses. I think Dr. Gray has all of them as well for the folks that are on the line. Even though you say it for those that phone in who aren't watching, we'll also type it at the bottom for those that are watching.
All right, are we ready for the next group here? So my name is Tracy Routsong, and I'm Vice President of DCAC this year. And I represent, my son is a rising senior at Topeka High School. And I don't see Ivan here, but I do see Sean.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sean Guile, and I am the DCAC Study Topic Coordinator, and I too have a rising senior at Topeka High School. So want to thank you, Dr. Anderson, and all of your staff for all the time you've given to DCAC over the last few months to get this ready.
Thank you. And I believe we may have one more DCAC member joining us. Other members on the team, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gray, and then he will also share his email address. I will ask all other communications members that are on this particular Zoom chat that unless you're hosting, there won't be a need for you to be on this space so that we leave enough picture availability for all people watching to see the current DCAC members. So Ms. Miller, you can disconnect from this space and just watch from Facebook Live. And Ms. Nordic, I believe you are hosting this session. So Ms. Nordic will remain on with us, and Ms. Hackett will remain on at this point as well as she is forwarding the questions to you. Dr. Gray.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Aaron Gray, and I'm the Director of Instructional Services for Topeka 501. And again, I welcome you. My email address is agray, and that is agray, @tps501.org. And again, we welcome you to this superintendent's debriefing.
Okay, so we're going to bring up the plan. The person that wrote the over 100-page document as the writer and listening to all the sessions is Ms. Risley. Ms. Risley will introduce herself, and then we're going to get started and screen share and bring up the plan. Now, let me share with you, this is a live document. So as we also are answering questions, this is an opportunity as well for you to share some ideas as well that you'd like to see potentially reflected. And we'll be taking those back, and some of those we may be able to just talk through here and use some opportunity to be flexible with some of the plans. Mrs. Risley, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Catherine Risley, and I'm a school improvement specialist for Topeka Public Schools, and I will now share my screen.
All right, and since Ms. Risley and I are in the same room, if we do get feedback, we'll adjust since we'll be tag teaming on some of this plan. Let me first start off with sharing, and I think we still have Mr. True, Dr. McDonald, and Ms. Nordic. So really the one person who's hosting should remain. Dr. McDonald is an improvement specialist who's going to remain for questions, but anyone who's not hosting at this time can remove off of the Zoom and watch on Facebook Live. So we have as much room for the photos of parents that might join a little late to be on the screen at the same time. Our plan is transforming Topeka together. Now, let me share with you some challenges that caused for us to have the plan that we currently have at this time. The first item in regards to the plan is to know that the current CDC guidelines and the Kansas Health Department guidelines restricts the number of students that can ride on buses to 1 student per seat. It also restricts the number of students that can be in classrooms to a social distancing space of 6 feet. When we measured all of our classes, many of the classrooms can only fit 12 to 15 students when we spread them 6 feet apart. Additionally, when we put 1 student on the bus per seat, unless they are siblings, it also greatly reduced the number of students that can be in the building at any one time. So with the 6 feet social distancing requirement, we are not able to bring all students back just based on that requirement alone on any given day at the same time. So it forced us to look at a model where we have half of the students being able to attend at any given day and half of the students attending at a different day and time. We want our parents to know that, because if we had a larger enough facility where we had endless space and could social distance with 6 feet, we would be having all of the students returning with that 6 feet social distance, but that is not what we have in place, and our buses will not have that in place either. Our buses are run by a vendor, so the vendor service is complying completely with the CDC guidelines as they should in that space. Now with that, transforming Topeka together is really intended to look at how we can transform teaching and learning in creative ways during the pandemic at this time. So Mrs. Risley is going to take us down to the table of contents. This plan will be posted by the end of today. It is a living document. We do want to acknowledge that these names that she scrolled by as we are in that table of contents really are individuals that are on the task force. For our task force, you'll see a lot of names underneath the second group of task force people, because we had several people on the KSDE planning task force. I won't read through those names, but we do want to acknowledge that we had a number of staff members on that task force. Those same ones were on our school local task force. So we do know that our plan is aligned with the KSDE plan. As we move down from there, our table of contents, when you see this online, whatever section you want to go to, it's hyperlinked, so you can skip directly to that section without going through all 100+ pages. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to scroll down in order and stop at each section, give the general pieces and components of the highlights, and then we will also be sharing it as well for the public once we've made final edits and updates. So there was a question, can everyone see this at this point on their own computers at this time until we post it live for all of our families? This is intended first for this Facebook Live group, as well as our DCAC leaders to go through this and have some conversation. And there may be updates along the way throughout this morning and even after today, but this will certainly be posted by 4 o'clock today and likely much earlier than that. All right, as we move forward to that, can we make this any larger though for parents that are online watching so that you can see this a little bit better as if it were on your own computer? The components of the plan really scan against several areas. The table of contents, if we go quickly to the very top part, when you look at this plan, the sections that we have covered in this plan includes the research section. The first part that you will see are the strategies and the timeline of what we've done from March till now. And then the overall strategies from KSDE about reopening. Our research, really, we looked at many different districts, and Mrs. Rissy is going to talk about that, and then she'll talk about the other components, and then we'll start from there. Ms. Rissy, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. So to start off, we are going to look through the like Dr. Anderson mentioned, we did use a variety of different plans from different places. We also looked at the research from the CDC. We looked at the research from the Kansas Health Department, and we tried to make sure that we had all of the different sources necessary. And then additionally, really talking through the different plan components with the people who were served on the task force. To start us off, we are going to look through, we'll just go down through the first few pieces. So it starts off with a message from Dr. Anderson, just about the different components of the plan. Following that, we have an introduction, which just speaks briefly about our overall piece. And this will be something that you can read once the document is released as well. And then we have our executive summary and our timeline. And then we move into our strategies for reopening. And this is the part that I think we might want to start talking through first. So for the first piece of this, it suggests that Topeka stakeholders will be updated continually via our district website and social media accounts. As you know, things have been changing rapidly. So we have been really seeking feedback from families through those virtual feedback sessions that we've had recently, and also working with the DCAC. Additionally, we will be releasing the plan later today and then continually updating as changes are made. We will be focusing on equity as always. That's one of our main focus areas in Topeka Public Schools. So a focus on equity is woven throughout the plan. Additionally, the district and each school will establish a reopening stakeholder group. So each school will be able to have a team that really figures out how to make these guidelines work for their individual school. So depending on the needs of each school, they'll be able to really tailor those recommendations to their context. And schools may consider having an advisory board composed of community members and families as well, just to really make sure that feedback is given. Additionally, schools will be using Scantron and other district endorsed common assessments to really figure out where students are instructionally. So they're going to be able to see, are there any gaps that have arisen during this time, during the spring quarter, and then just really figure out how can we fill in those gaps? How can we develop a plan for each student to be successful academically? At the same time, we will be following all Kansas standards. The students will be taught, whether they're in person or remote, the same standards, and they will be assessed on these as well. So that's just to really make sure every teacher has the information needed.
Okay, so with that in mind, and I've just transitioned because we were getting feedback and an echo. So for our Facebook Live families, thank you for the feedback. So we're now in two different spaces. Ms. Risley, if you go back really quickly to that table of contents, we just want to make sure for those families, as we have 2 questions already, and we'll get questions and stop periodically and not this frequently, but just at the beginning for those families that logged on, several of them wanted to know about the sections of the plan. So the sections do include the research section for what other places are doing. Additionally, the educational equity communication will include all of the different ways you'll be finding out information. So when we go through the different phases, how will you know, and what are the different forms? Our human resources is really about our staffing, and if there's a quarantine, what that will look like. And then the instructional programs deals more with the schedule. The very bottom part talks a little bit about our fine arts and our CTE. And then the last part from there, if we go down just a little bit on that screen, we'll just kind of scroll down just a little bit, deals with our support programs, professional programs, and our preparation services, such as meal service. We do have in our plan a whole section on student services, which are school counselors and social workers. We included our homeless students. So all of those are also in the very back of the plan. And then lastly, we included an appendix in this plan. The appendix includes a variety of documents. The teacher to nurse referral that we'll be using that our nurse coordinator created, a COVID-19 checklist that we created as well, and a variety of other items that are also in the appendix. With that, we're going to go straight down from there and go back to where Ms. Risley left off at, the very next section that we're jumping into for our families. And the questions, Dr. McDonald and Dr. Gray, when we stop, kind of have 2 or 3 questions ready live that we can address. Our DCAC really will be posing questions, and many of the questions coming in may already be addressed by DCAC from what they've gathered. As we go to the very next page, from where Ms. Rissy left off at. There is a question about, do they have to enroll fully? We're going to get to the schedule, but just in case you're not on later, we know that our families showed interest in all three options. So the three options that all schools nationally are being asked to consider are either a hybrid model, which is a partially in school and partially at home. And we know because of the group size restrictions that we've already described, we will have to have a hybrid model just because all of the students can't fit in the school on any given day. So we'll have to have that. But our parents also said they'd like for kids to go to school every day. So we also have some avenues in which we will be making that happen. And we're going to talk about what that includes, especially our early learners. And then the last one, several families shared they'd like for their children to be 100% remote. You can enroll today in Topeka Public Schools and mark that you want 100% remote, and you will be able to do that. So all three options are going to be offered to give parents in as much flexibility as possible. The first section talks about preparing for when someone is sick, and this is probably first and foremost on people's mind. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Rissy to scroll on up and then to talk a little bit about when someone gets sick, what this looks like in schools and what we're telling schools to do.
So when somebody is ill, or we are asking schools to make sure that students and staff members who are ill are not able to return until they've met the CDC's criteria, and can also produce a doctor's release. Additionally, it is really critical to isolate students who might come to school sick or staff members who might come to school sick. As such, we will be having, each school will have a separate room in addition to their nurse's office, and any student who has any symptoms will be asked to wait there, and any staff member who is working with them will be wearing PPE just to make sure that they are as safe as possible. Additionally,
I'll interject here. We do want you to know that Topeka High will be offering COVID testing for those families that have children at Topeka High or staff there, because the University of Kansas Hospital opened a unique partnership and where we have a clinic/hospital at Topeka High. They are willing to serve the whole district. However, we will not be inviting individuals who think they may have COVID positive symptoms into a high school on any given day. But if students are already there and staff are there, they have gotten the materials and have agreed to provide on-site testing if that is of interest for families or staff, as to help you not have to have the gap in time in going to the doctor's office outside of that. So it operates just like a regular doctor's office. Ms. Rissa, you can continue.
Additionally, we will be making sure that all of our nursing staff and teachers are aware of the signs and symptoms of multi-inflammatory syndrome in children, to make sure that they're aware of that as well. Additionally, we do not transport individuals who are ill, so we'll be communicating to families about making sure there's provisions to transport children home if needed, if they're ill. Additionally, we'll be making sure that cleaning and disinfecting best practices are followed. So if an area was used by a sick child or a sick teacher, the area will not be able to be used until after cleaning and disinfecting. Additionally, we will make sure that we notify local health officials immediately of any case of COVID-19 or any suspected case while maintaining confidentiality. And student and families and staff members will be notified if they have had close contact with a person. We'll follow all the health recommendations.
And so with that, we're going to stop in that section to answer questions that the DCAC may have at this point about just this section of when someone is sick or cleaning and disinfecting. And I'm going to give you a hypothetical, which might be helpful, and then I'll turn it over to you to have conversation about what you would like to talk about in this area. With this piece, if an individual shared a teacher or student that they may have been exposed to someone that has now tested COVID positive, then that family would be notified that we have had a potential exposure by letter, and there's a template letter that we have. There will also be phone calls to all the families in that classroom so that they know that. The class will be closed. The health department will be notified. We do have every school with a contact tracer identified staff member, and they're not an official contact tracer other than investigating who all those young people came in contact with within the building. And then the health department will take it from there in determining if there's a quarantine needed for the whole class or not, and they will be making contact with families from there. And so it's important to know that in some cases, the health department has determined that a full quarantine isn't needed for numbers of people, but they must do the investigation after we turn it over to them, all of which will be done that same day that we're notified that there has been a COVID exposure. I'll stop with that to ask if DCAC has conversation or thoughts on this particular area.
Lisa, did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So a question that we had was, what is going to happen if there are multiple children or young people ill at the same time? How will nurses be able to respond?
And so with that, at this time, our nurse coordinator, we're fortunate that we have roving nurses as well. So every school in Topeka Public School has a nurse. In addition to the nurse that they have, we also have, of course, the University of Kansas Health System that's providing added resources, but we have roving nurses. So we have actually individuals who go from school to school who help supervise nurses. So they actually are receiving training before school starts on the COVID pandemic in general and how to treat students. But that will be our added support. Normally, they wouldn't be coming in and helping treat students in this fashion, but we'll be using those roving nurses to operate in this space in that manner. If we find that we have in one building more needs at any one given day than what we can handle, at this time we are looking at having added temporary services. So we've actually bidded out for temporary services for substitutes in a variety of areas so that we have flexibility to use added vendor services if we need that. But we're hoping to use the people that our children actually know as a first step.
All right, well, thank you.
Are there other questions? Are we okay with me going on to the next section?
I think one of the questions that got brought up yesterday was about if a COVID vaccine becomes available, would it be mandatory for a face-to-face option for students to be able to go to school?
It is not mandatory and will not be in the future mandatory for face-to-face schooling. I believe that it's really a parent's choice of how they would like for their child to be educated. And right now we have some parents that currently choose homeschool and don't send their children to school right now. And so this just expands the option in ways that parents feel are best. We believe students learn best when they're in a building, but of course we're the educators who want to see them every day. So we would like for families to return their children to school, but we want to leave that up to parents. I will tell you, some parents have learned that their child works better online, particularly for their children who have anxiety around people. So some young people who have high anxiety in groups have functioned better with the online system. And those parents have asked, can they keep that going? Right now, we have approximately 800 families signed up to be remote only 100% of the time. It includes 400 elementary and approximately 450 or so secondary. We're going to move to the next section. In the next section, it really talks about maintaining healthy environments, and this is from the CDC. This is a continuation about cleaning and disinfecting. We want you to know that our surfaces will be cleaned frequently, and with the schedule that we are proposing, it will be cleaned midweek between the two groups. So students will be put together as cohort groups, siblings on the same days. So Monday, Tuesday would be one schedule. We then disinfect and deep clean on Wednesday while students are still having remote learning at home. And then the second group would return on Thursday, Friday. That allows us that if there's an outbreak, if there's someone that's COVID positive, we know what group they were in, and the building is being cleaned midweek before the second group comes in and touches anything. So that's one step that we're doing. The recommendation, which we are certainly embracing, is that door handles, sink handles, all of those things will be frequently cleaned. Shared objects will be discouraged. Therefore, within the shared objects being discouraged, we want you to know that the seating arrangement will be constructed where the same number of desks will be in a classroom, but you'll have the desks that are measured 6 feet apart. Within that 6 feet apart, in between every desk will be an empty desk that stays empty. On one side of the empty desk will be the student who comes on Monday, Tuesday. That will always be their desk, so students will have that assigned seat. So if you're a high school student and you go into a class, you will know what seat you go to every time you go to that classroom. Now, there might be different students who come to a particular class on a given day, but it will really limit the number of kids that sat in that seat. So if something is an outbreak, we know who was in that seat. If you're elementary and you're wondering, can I bring my school supplies? Yes, they can go in that desk because that's the only desk that that particular student will be using. On the other side of that empty desk will be the student who comes on Thursday, Friday. Okay, so the discouraging of shared items is really the step that we're having at this point. And any items that, for example, in preschool or other places that are shared will be disinfected daily. So any toys, or we call it a dirty table. So if there's a dirty table where kids are playing with things and have them sitting on the table, those will be disinfected at the end of every night. As we proceed forward, ventilation is the next topic, and water systems. These were bulleted items that I first saw a page or two earlier, but this is the greater area that explains what these bulleted items mean. Ventilation, it's encouraged that we ensure ventilation systems are in place, which includes having as much outdoor airflow as possible. The example would be opening windows and doors. So all doors in classrooms will now be open, as opposed to sometimes, to maintain a reduction in noise, you'll see closed classroom doors. In some special ed rooms, they really need to close the doors for various reasons, but the windows may well be open to allow for airflow throughout the building. When that is not possible, do know that we will continue to have our ventilation system operating as we normally would, but we will be looking at ways in which we can have ongoing opportunities for students to go outside for lunch, for recess, and for other times that we feel like would be appropriate. Under water systems, the drinking fountains will all be modified to be changed into filling stations. Students may bring water bottles to school. Many of our schools buy their children water bottles at the beginning of the year, and many PTOs do that as part of their PTO activity at the beginning of the year. In the past, students are not necessarily encouraged to bring water bottles, but now they will be allowed to do so. Many of our schools for pre-K through 2 will be having disposable cups so that students can use a disposable cup and throw it away and use it at the water filling station. So all water fountains will be, the top will be taken off, and they actually will have an extender, and those will now be water filling stations instead of water fountains. I'm going to stop there to see if there are questions that you'd like to ask before we go into the modified layout and the physical barrier. And for our DCAC, there is a sample classroom set up at the central office building where you normally meet. If you'd like to see the layout and the various sneeze guards and things that are in place. But do you have questions before we go to the layout? That's the next section.
Sean, did you have your question?
Yeah, I guess sort of associated with this, you talk about the limiting the shared materials. One of the things that leads to is, will the school supply lists that are ubiquitous to the elementaries, will those be modified? Will they be required to provide extra supplies, or how will that be handled?
Schools will not be asking for extra supplies. So currently the school supply list that's posted at stores that parents may have purchased, those supplies certainly would still be utilized because students would still be coming and receiving a very similar lesson. We have asked for every school group every school team, school reopening team, to reevaluate what could be reduced possibly, but we will not be asking for additional supplies. So for example, masks, and I'll use that as a thought of a potential added supply. We know that students cannot enter the bus or school unless they have a mask on. It's like a piece of clothing now. You can't enter the bus or school without a shirt and shoes on. You can't enter your school without a mask on. But we know students will come with a mask, which is the mandate that is in the county right now. Well, we are still purchasing all students a mask if they need it. When they come in, if their mask that they have on perhaps is not fitting well or it needs to be changed, our school will have a mask available for every student to use. It will be a washable mask, but that mask will be available. In fact, we've purchased 2 per student so that if they do need to take one home to wash it or need to have assistance from the school in washing it, they can have one and have a second one as a backup. So we will be retaining those in the building and providing those as one example of a supply that parents do not have to purchase. Any way that we can lessen the burden of parents of any supplies, we certainly will. Does that answer the question, and does that sound reasonable to our DCAC families?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, and I think that does answer the question. Just wanting to make sure that we're covering our kids as best we can.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Gray or Dr. McDonald, are there 1 or 2 questions on that topic from our Facebook friends? All right, proceeding forward. We're going to go to the modified layout and the physical barriers and guides. Under the modified layout, the seating, I've already said, is 6 feet apart when feasible. Now for us, we are making sure that we've already measured all of the classrooms. So we know, again, approximately 12 to 15 students can fit in just about all of our classrooms thus far that we're using as we prepare to reopen. The desks, we will be turning desks to face in the same direction rather than facing each other. Or students who have tables in their classroom will sit on one end of the table and then the other student will be assigned a seat on the other side of the table. We do now have plastic sneeze guards, and those will be on desks. So you will actually see a plastic barrier that is between every student on their desk. So if I'm sitting on a desk right now, I in front of me have a plastic barrier that encompasses from one end of the desk, and it is a square all the way around the desk. If it is a table, we've also purchased the same type of plexiglass or plastic barrier that can sit on a desk so that students can be within a confined space and speak freely and remove their mask and not have to have an issue with being right next to anyone else. Okay. The health department has shared that while masks should be worn coming in and in public spaces, when a student is sitting at a desk, particularly when you have a sneeze guard around you, that they could remove their mask and do their work and have conversation with their teacher or answer a question. So that's what that would and could look like in a classroom. Okay. Moving from there and sticking with that barrier, all classrooms have been purchased floor signs, and that will show the 6 feet distancing. So the school reopen team in every school, again, I've asked for every school to have their own team. The school reopen teams, which include our custodians and nurses and other individuals on that team, they this week and next week are designing the layout in which students will enter and making sure the 6 feet distancing is properly placed so that no matter where you are in the building, you will know the structure in which to move. Signs are also being placed on all the walls based on the school reopen team's route that they're creating in the building. For communal spaces, the shared spaces and the gatherings will look different. At this time, the CDC and Kansas Health Department are asking that we minimize communal spaces and shared spaces to the extent possible. This means that we'll be staggering our schedule when students actually leave a classroom to go somewhere else, and that will be minimized as well. There's a question that was just sent in, will students have art, music, and PE? We will continue to have all of the electives, and the school reopen team is determining what that will look like in their building. We are committed to the arts, and we're committed to physical movement, and we know that's how students learn best. Now, in some schools, they already had art on a cart, and they already were pushing in. And so that may well still look like that. In other places, that may look different, depending on the space within your building and that school reopen team's plan. But all schools will still have that. School assemblies for schools, all of our elementary schools used to have assemblies, and many of our middle schools did as well, and parent nights and student performances at this time will not be held in person unless it's approved by the state guidelines. So in the phase we're currently in, assemblies, parent nights, and large group gatherings are not recommended by our Kansas Health Department. Therefore, they will not be allowed at this time. Schools will be encouraged to hold gatherings virtually in place of that, or to have small group gatherings in ways that are possible. So there was a question about parents, and so we'll turn it over to you, that if there are questions about parents or meetings or gatherings, do you have any questions in that area, and we'll answer those.
So there was a question about PTOs and other parent groups, about where will they be able to meet in the building in the evenings, or would there be another communal space that they could access?
Yes, PTO groups may still meet because they're within the group guidelines. However, some PTOs are rather large, and if they are significant in number at large high schools, for example, the principal's reopening team is determining the guidelines by which those meetings might occur, and or if the number needs to be reduced and how many people from the outside are allowed to attend. Some PTOs really just have their officers come together, and it's a small group of 5 or 10 or 15, much like you'll see in a classroom. Those will still be allowed to meet, and the principal will be sharing the guidelines and the dates and working with each PTO president. All principals will be contacting their PTO presidents and officers next week, and we'll be talking about this plan as well and sharing what that schedule might look like collaboratively. Again, we're asking for all parents to have somewhat of an advisory group to give input into how this can be a living and real document for their own individual school. We're going to move to the section of food service, if that's acceptable. All right, so in looking at food service, and then we'll stop and see if there are questions from Dr. Gray or Dr. McDonald. In the area of food service, Topeka Public Schools will maintain and stay in compliance with the health guidelines. So this includes that there will be different options, which could include continuing in the cafeteria with 6 feet social distancing, as you would see today in a restaurant. The classroom already has, in many of our buildings, breakfast in the classroom. And so those options, again, within the 6 feet social distancing and proper ventilation would continue and could be options. And then alternative spaces that elementary has not always used, but secondary has, are our outdoor eating areas. We'll actually be encouraging the outdoor eating areas that many schools have but haven't always used to be utilized. So students will be allowed to have lunch outside. Parents are encouraged to have students bring their own meals when feasible, but we certainly will have our normal food operation team in place. They will be serving individual plated meals and then ensuring that the cafeteria manager, who is on the reopen team, and the nursing staff who is on the reopen team will be adjusting the meal services in ways that ensures there's not an open buffet for students. So for example, there's been an open salad bar in the past in many schools. Those open spaces would not be in place in that fashion, but we certainly will have our food service team offering many of those options in a more confined and safer, restricted way. Moving forward, you'll see several items about food related to disinfecting services. So between food serving, the places in which students have been eating will be disinfected before the next group comes in. We will have a do not share food policy among students. So students are not allowed to share between one another in regards to their food items, and disposable food service items are being encouraged, which would include our utensils and dishes. If disposable items are not feasible in the area, then we will be ensuring that all non-disposable food service items are handled with gloves, and certainly will be utilizing our washing services as we have in the past. All students will be washing their hands not only before lunch, but we have all classrooms and hallways will also have hand sanitizer so that students can utilize that every hour, which is the recommendation from the Kansas Health Department and the KSDE guidelines. Students will have access to that on an hourly basis, including before lunch. Any questions?
Yes, Dr. Anderson, one of the questions that we had regarding lunch service was, with the alternating A and B groups, how will the group that is not in the building on a given day, how will they be provided service if they're on, for example, the free and reduced meals, or if they have an IEP that calls for the food service?
So our food service team is meeting throughout next week now that this plan is completed, and now that we know we have a reduced schedule. But I'll give you one of the suggested models that is being looked at. And so as this guideline comes out, again, within each building, you'll have, this is how this looks for the district as well as the building. One of the suggested items includes what we're currently doing now for the summer meal serving program. And we'll speak to that as well since we have a delayed school start. But our model includes when students are at school, for example, if I'm a student that comes on Monday and Tuesday, when I leave on Tuesday, I will be given a lunch to take with me on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And we've had practice with that because we got out of school in March. And so we learned all kinds of meals, chicken nuggets, and all kinds of things that we could actually create that would be sustainable for the following 3 days that were good. And on Monday and Tuesday, we were able to continue to give those hot lunches and breakfasts. In those bags, we also will put the breakfast for those next following days. Likewise, if you're a student on Thursday and Friday, we're devising a way to get those students still lunch for that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, which may include having our buses go to the bus stops, and we have staff members that will be able to assist with those deliveries, but we're still planning what that looks like for the Thursday, Friday group. Again, that team is actually planning today and will be planning throughout next week so that that food service program can reach all of the students throughout the district that need and or want to partake in that. Thank you for asking that question. Most recently, we've had a delayed start, and that delayed start that we currently have, people have asked about food service. Thanks to our Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Robbins, and his team, they submitted a waiver to see if we would be approved, and we were thrilled that yesterday we were approved for our waiver. So our summer program in Topeka Public Schools and feeding program will continue throughout the course of this time and through the time in which we begin school. Okay, so that program that's in place now will continue and actually does not end as it was previously announced. All right, we will continue from there. I do want you to know the summer meal program may adjust and expand actually since as we prepare to start up for the school year, but any adjustment will be shared with all of our families, but the adjustment would only be adding more sites rather than being more restrictive. Are there questions or items so far from our Facebook friends, Dr. Gray or Dr. McDonald on food service?
Yes, Dr. Anderson, there's a question that has come up about how often would hand washing occur?
The next area talks a little bit about disinfecting, but we'll go back to what the CDC and the Kansas Health Department has shared. They have suggested that hand washing for students should be every hour. So we are supplying students with the hand sanitizer, but also hand washing stations are being provided, and students will have schedules within their building where they will be able to wash hands in the restroom as well. But let's say, for example, in a school, we're minimizing contact to the restroom. You might see a hand washing station instead of students leaving and going to the bathroom, standing in line, because one of these suggestions is that we reduce congregating. So in the Kansas Health Department and the Kansas Department of Education guidance document, it has suggested that we minimize congregating. Therefore, we're going to make the hand washing and or sanitizer use in the classroom as much as possible, or in hallway hand washing station areas as much as possible. But within every hour is the schedule that principals are putting together so that students have that ability. Are there other questions at this time? All right, we will continue on. There are the next section. Ms. Risley, would you like to speak to the next section?
Yes. So the next section is just related again to the fact that we will be really teaching and we'll be really teaching students these different procedures. So reinforcing the different procedures with face coverings and proper ways to wear them. We will be having professional development for both staff and students that will be available for each student, available on each school's website. Additionally, we'll be teaching and reinforcing social distancing protocols for different situations, such as if students are walking in the hallways, for example, or in the cafeteria, for example. Additionally, there will be limited locker use available, and especially in secondary schools, the hallway lockers will be delayed, but that will be a procedure that will be assessed on an ongoing basis. So if it's feasible to open the lockers again, then that will be utilized.
I will say on the lockers for band and instruments, which we will be offering fine arts, but we'll be limiting the kind of instruments that students might be able to use to start. But when students have large instruments, they need lockers for that. And so in some cases, the locker space may be utilized, but there isn't congregating in those particular cases. But the lockers in the hallways that you might see in a high school or middle school, that at this time will not be used. So I'm going to stop there because I know for parents, there may be questions or some conversation you want to have. Now, in any of these areas, if you have other ideas you might want to propose, we're open for that as well. Are there questions about locker use or areas that we've just talked about?
Yeah, Dr. Anderson, a question that we had was if the students aren't going to be allowed to use their lockers to minimize congregating, what will the district have a policy on backpacks in the classroom, since currently that's not allowed?
At this time, first of all, we'll be discouraging bringing too many added materials to the classroom, but we will have to allow backpacks to some degree in classrooms, given there are no locker available spaces. We will discourage bags in the classroom to the extent possible, again, but we certainly have changed what students might need to bring to the classroom in that regard. So yes, they can bring backpacks in the classroom in limited ways. We're, again, discouraging it, but it will be allowed. It is our hope that students really just come in with what they really need. So, you know, a backpack, for example, might hold some of their extracurricular materials, music sheets for their choir class, things like that. So we've really asked teachers to look at how they can create spaces for that in the classroom so students don't have to lug things back and forth. And books that they would normally carry back and forth, those things would stay stationary in classrooms. So we're making sure there are extra resources available so that that can occur. But where it is necessary, we are relaxing the rules in that regard. There are no other questions. We're going to go to the very next section. And the next section gets really interesting. It's the bus. Okay, so as we talk about seating on the bus, Mrs. Risley, do you want to start with that area?
Sure. So in terms of transportation, the CDC guidance recommends that on buses, there's only one student per seat. Other than siblings are allowed to share seats because they are in the same household, but otherwise you can only have one student per seat. As such, that means that it's fewer children who can be on each bus. Additionally, students will be expected to use face coverings. Students and drivers will be expected to use face coverings on buses, and assigned seats will have to be on buses as well. Additionally, we are encouraging for, as feasible, alternate transportation arrangements. However, like we said, we will have transportation available. The school buses will also be cleaning the vehicles thoroughly. Kansas Central will be setting up a system for this to make sure that the buses are cleaned regularly after each route. And then additionally, we will be asking bus drivers while the weather's nice to try to keep windows open as much as possible for air circulation, restricting food, encouraging students to use the hand sanitizer or wash their hands prior to boarding. And then we'll even be loading students and unloading them in a manner that encourages social distancing. And the seat behind the driver will remain empty on each trip. And then taking the temperatures of school vehicle drivers and attendants before bus duty or before active duties should take place. So just really trying to make sure that we're following all the possible procedures to keep our transportation options as safe as possible.
Mrs. Risley, can you make the screen larger? Our Facebook friends can't see the screen very well. Bus drivers will be wearing masks. We'll be taking temperatures. Students will not be allowed on the bus if they do not have a mask, and parents must be prepared that if they do have a temperature, they will not be allowed to ride the bus. Again, as we've said before, one student per seat, and these are rules that the bus company that we use has shared with us, and these are the CDC guidelines. Are there questions regarding the bus?
Yes, Dr. Anderson. What special accommodations will be made for special education and special needs assistants? This might include allowing nurses on the buses or mask use for special education students, et cetera.
So we're jotting that item down that you'd like to know what and like to suggest added accommodations for special education students, such as nursing staff. Is that what I'm understanding you to suggest, Ms. Collette?
Yes, some students have a home health care nurse that goes to school with them, and so they ride the bus with them, and that's also written in their IEP, and so I didn't know if you guys would take that into account.
In regards to the one student per seat, certainly in compliance with their IEP, we would allow for their IEP to still be followed, understanding that if they have a nurse, while they do ride one student per seat, whatever their IEP dictates related to their nurse or nursing services will be allowed. In regards to the additional PPE equipment, if a special education student needs or the IEP dictates that they need added equipment, such as a face shield, would be an added piece of equipment. Or a voice amplifier, because they have a mask and it's easier to hear them. We certainly will be following the IEP and implementing those services. Other questions about buses and thoughts about buses?
Dr. Anderson, we have a question about masks being available on the bus if a student does not have one.
The vendor service will not be providing masks if a student does not have one, because it is expected in the county that the rule is to leave your home and go out in the community, you should have a mask. Again, we're looking at it as if it were needing a piece of clothing, much like when you leave your home. We will suggest, and the vendor again is not a Topeka Public Schools employee, rather they are a service provider. We would suggest that if a parent has difficulty with a mask at this time and they're unable to go out in the community and they're stuck in their home and their child has not been able to leave the home due to being unable to have a mask, they should call their principal, and their principal can assist in areas that really have that issue. But we do feel that since that is a county-wide expectation, all students should arrive with the mask already on. Right.
Also, very quickly, another question about, will there just be the one bus driver on the bus, or will buses or some buses have additional adult?
Some bus drivers will have additional staff, but the bus company is determining what their staffing will be looking like, as well as they are informing us of the rules that they must comply with, which includes the 1 student per bus. So we will be gathering that information and sharing that with parents in the coming weeks from the bus company. But I certainly don't want to overspeak for the vendor service rather than what we know at this time, which is the requirement of mask, temperatures, and 1 student per bus. Again, if a student has a temperature, they will not be allowed on the bus. If they have a fever when they arrive to the bus, they will not be allowed on the bus. Therefore, our school reopen teams have been informed of that, so that not only will our parents be informed, but that we ensure there is a plan so that families know that their child in the morning may go to the bus if they have a fever, then, and maybe the parent didn't know they had a fever. They won't be allowed on the bus, so that that parent has planned where that child should go if they're not allowed to school or to travel to the building. All right, moving from there, DCAC friends, are you still okay with, I know this is quite a lengthy document. As we proceed forward, we're going to go into the next section. This next section really is about attendance and distance learning on the various platforms. Ms. Rissy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. For students who are engaged in distance learning, the district is expected to track attendance. As such, we will be developing a system that's aligned with KSDE criteria for distance learning as well. So students will be required to be instructed and assessed on the same standards in distance or remote learning as they are during the school day in the school building. Students will also have a regular logged connection with their teacher in accordance with KSDE guidelines. Students will also have a regular log of educational activities that must be signed by both students and parents and submitted to the district. And as this is right aligned with KSDE guidelines. So right now what our planning is that elementary families will be able to submit this signed form via Seesaw. Secondary families will be able to submit a weekly Google form, but we do need to track the instructional minutes that students are involved in learning when they're learning remotely. Additionally, the next piece is regarding extracurricular activities, and we will be following the guidelines of the State High School Activities Association. We are working with them to make sure that we can try to really just ensure safety while also creating operational plans to fit different categories, which are listed there, such as facilities cleaning, hygiene practices, physical activity, and athletic equipment. But really just trying to see how can we get students back involved in extracurricular activities and athletics, but in a safe way. And additionally, schools will be encouraged to include activity coordinators on their reopening team. So they'll really be able to work together to figure out how to develop the best system.
We're going to stop there to see, do you have questions of DCAC and or things that you just want to stop and chat about on those last 2 areas? Yeah,
one thing related to that, you talked a little bit there about the extracurricular and CASHA and the some of the fine arts, but we were looking at, how about some of the co-curricular items such as the debate team or some of the clubs such as if there's a mathematics club or a science club that the students have, how will those be handled?
So at this point, as school reopening teams are planning, we have asked all school reopening teams to work to maintain all co-curricular, extracurricular activities and clubs and sports that they can possibly retain. All of the areas as well that students previously did, such as a link crew and areas that were sponsored by staff on club day, we're asking that those also be considered to be retained. So if there is something that they cannot retain at a school, that school will determine that and will inform families. But they've been given the instruction to work to maintain and retain as many of the activities as they possibly can, much like we're doing at this time with some of our practices for sports.
Okay, thank you on that. And
is that acceptable for you, Mr. Guile, or what are your thoughts about that?
I feel like we have to do whatever we can for those extracurricular and co-curricular activities, because those are what, in some cases, that's what drives the students to attend and to perform within the classroom, is the opportunity to take part in those other aspects, you know, whether it be Scholars Bowl, marching band, one of the choir ensembles, small choir ensembles, you know, and then of course your athletic events, your athletic teams. So I think that is important. And associated with that, I'm going to jump another question, but this sort of opened it up because you talked about the reopening teams. How is the district going to make sure that, recognizing buildings are different, how are they going to, what is the district going to do to ensure the equity and availability of programs across the buildings?
And so one of the items, you know, you as the DCAC group just did a report on equity across the district in certain terms of programs. And so the current programs they've had in place, we've asked for them to look at continuing to have those in that regard. In terms of adding new programs and services at this time, we don't anticipate that there will be many new things added because we're already in a very difficult time just keeping what we have creatively. You know, because here's the problem. If you have debate, and what the principals have to struggle and look at is if you have students and you don't know who wants to sign up for debate, and what if some are Monday, Tuesday, and some are Thursday, Friday, making sure that they creatively schedule so that students are in cohort groups so that you can really have enough students together at one time to be within the guidelines, but also to be able to function. So equitable services, can you share a little bit more about what you hope to see? And then we can think about what we can put in place beyond what we already have.
I think you touched on it a little bit there with the A groups and the B groups, you know, within a building, making sure that an A group and a B group have access to the same opportunities. But also there is, you know, the example would be, for example, Debate or Scholars Bowl that is hosted by multiple buildings, that multiple buildings have that program. Making sure that whatever Topeka West selects for their implementation of Scholars Bowl is comparable with how Topeka High or Highland Park would implement it. So, you know, it's making sure that the opportunities that are common across the buildings historically, that the way that opportunity is structured in this new reality is comparable across the buildings. You know,
So
I would not want to see, for example, a club or program that is at multiple high schools where one high school, it's just that program's not going to be offered, while at one of the others, we're still going to offer it, but we're going to change it this way. You know, so we want to make sure that where we already have equity, that we keep that equity. And so I think that's one of the things that, you know, it's something DCAC has looked at multiple times, and it's something that we feel you have worked very hard on in your tenure here. We want to make sure that stays at the forefront, is that equity issue.
Absolutely. But you just raised an idea. So let me offer you all this idea, and DCAC, let me know what you think. one of the things that we know principals have already been told, maintain programs that you have, maintain the quality that you have, and be prepared to communicate that to families. But perhaps this is an additional piece. The issue, even outside of the pandemic that you just raised, is that sometimes a Scholars Bowl, for example, looks different at school A than B, and the quality may be different in between school A and B, potentially. Therefore, perhaps this year, as we're preparing professional development for teachers, our new teachers actually come back next week, and we're looking at the new calendar on for our veteran teachers. But as they come back, perhaps we'll have a professional development sessions for club sponsors to, and we haven't done this in the past, but we could, for club sponsors to have conversation, if we know who those sponsors are, about quality, particularly with so much remote activity going on, and how they can maybe be their own focus group conversation about resources and quality and trips that they're going on. Do you think that could be then beneficial as just a new conversation, because we now have Zoom where we really could bring all these club individuals together? What do you think about having the activity coordinators look at that?
I think that would be very good. One of the things that, as you know, that the DCAC congratulated the district on during the continuous learning environment was the way you brought together, for example, the math teachers at the various buildings, brought them together for them to collaborate on what that continuous learning would look like. We would encourage you to do something like that with those clubs. You know, when you can cross-pollinate between the buildings, I think you gain something enormous.
Absolutely. So then we did tell all schools that the activity coordinator for the school, who plans a lot of these events that you've talked about in clubs, they are required to be on the reopening team. And so those activity coordinators, we will share your idea and thought with them so that they can look at equity between the activities and be able to articulate that to not only DCAC, but to our broader parent group. The other thing is we'll also just create one list of here are all the activities across the district at each school, and here's some commonalities between those to further hold ourselves accountable about ensuring there's greater equity in that regard. Thank you for that suggestion. And Dr. Gray, we'll leave it to you to share that with activity coordinators who are on the reopening teams. Back to the next section of this plan on athletics and activities. We did receive a question about buses as we go down from the activity area and go to our next section. The bus question was regarding if a student has a fever, will bus drivers have the parents' phone numbers? Keep in mind that the way this currently works, which we would still have it work in a similar fashion, but we currently, if a bus driver has a student, let's say a student was ill with just a fever normally or throwing up, and they just got on the bus. In a district this size, certainly something like that has happened where a student is ill or throws up or can't go to school for some reason. Then the driver then notifies the bus service and principal, and generally we have another bus that either picks that student up, or while the bus is still waiting, they then call the parent to pick up that student. When that can happen, the school in the past has gone to the stop, and they may wait with that student and ensure that student is properly escorted to their home. And so that can happen a variety of ways. While the school can escort them to their home, they certainly can wait with the student when there's a need. So that's currently what happens. We anticipate the same thing would happen. If a student had a fever and couldn't go, it wouldn't be anything different than if a student was sick with throwing up or something and couldn't go to school. So those contacts will be held by the driver, and the principals will be prepared to respond more readily under these new conditions. We're not going to read the research. We're just going to let you know that the research is in the document. Additionally, mental health, and we're going to go up just a little bit as we're kind of skipping over the options there in our mental health plan. So we're going to go back to that piece. We want you to know that our mental health staff member, actually the one at Whitson, she was on the KSDE planning team, and we're so excited about that because it's allowed us to also look at the research And so we will have access to school counselors and school health-based clinics within the district, as we have had in the past. But the school health services and mental health services will be expanded in some creative ways, which are later in this document. All right, so now we're going to talk about remote and distance learning and what those are, even the terminology of distance learning. We want you to know that distance learning really involves virtual experiences, and they can be happening at the same time or remotely. So synchronous learning is learning that happens in real time. So that would mean that teachers and students are all together in real time. Asynchronous learning is when students are really not having a lot of direct interaction, learning that's occurring online without real-time interaction with educators is what asynchronous learning, when we use those terms. We also want to make sure you know what hybrid means, and hybrid is a combination of both the synchronous learning and the asynchronous teaching and learning. So with that in mind, we want to talk about what the instructional model will be. We have 3 options. We're using all 3. We're going to go back to option 1. Option 1, which is a little bit earlier, the option 1 is hybrid, and that hybrid means that students will be in school and in online. Now, the hybrid learning option 2 and 3, some schools will be adjusting with what that hybrid looks like in their building. A hybrid can be delivered with our educators in a classroom, but you can also have hybrid delivered by a student could be at home and they can Zoom into the classroom in real time. We're encouraging that. Yes, sir.
Dr. Anderson, that was one of the places where we heard several questions over the last period of time. During that remote learning in the synchronous model, will the students that are at home, you know, for example, if group A is in the building and group B is at home, would that group B be expected to be in a set of Zooms for, you know, that 6 or 7 hours that make up the school day? You know, can you talk a little bit about how in that hybrid model those go together?
Yes. And so our assistant superintendent, who I actually should be inviting on this call, in fact, Dr. Gray, invite Mrs. Wallace to join this as we're just about to approach instruction. So the day actually will be broken up. So there are several options. Some students, for example, we've had some high school students share that they only have a couple of classes and they have an AP class and they want their teacher and they want to Zoom in during real time. In fact, several high school students have asked that. And we will be making that an option to be available where students can Zoom in real time. But that doesn't fit every student, particularly if you have multiple classes. Now we'll have a block schedule, so students will have fewer classes, but rather than sitting and looking at a screen the entire time, we also will have the day broken up. So if you're elementary or middle, PE, music, library will also still be options in person or remotely. But students will be engaged in learning, but not necessarily in online activities. So we'll actually have the day, each school will determine kind of what that day looks like for their learner. And that student will have some time that's online and they'll record that. But when they're at home, they'll also have activities, assignments that are offline that they'll be asked and able to do. We do also have now the digital library, so students can actually check books out as well online. We also have PE, art and music in person and online. So, but that's modified, so you may not necessarily see a student online the full 6 hours. The Kansas Department of Education has required that parents sign a log that says their child completed so many hours. So we have a pre-populated template for parents to look at, and it will show based on that child's really personalized plan, here's that what the week looks like for their child. And at the end of that week, parents would sign the log saying their child did complete those activities in that amount of time. Again, some online and some offline activities. We have a great deal of cohort personalized services being offered in this particular model. And it'll take a great deal of time to structure that, but we believe it will better support all students rather than having everybody Zoom in and sit all day in a classroom.
Good to hear that. That was one concern that we saw numerous times in our discussions, and it was also in yesterday's Facebook comments during your presentation to the school board. I have to apologize, Dr. Anderson. We as the DCAC have been having to drop some of us off for meetings, and I was the last one left, and I have a meeting that I'm actually hosting, so I've got to go get my Zoom session started. You guys all understand that. So I encourage you, Dr. Anderson, it looks like we've got quite a few people on the Facebook Live session. So if you guys have some time that you can give them some more information. We've also sent you a group of questions, and we sent those to Dr. Gray late last night. We'd encourage you to look at converting some of those potentially into FAQs or forwarding those on to your building teams to make sure they get addressed. So I apologize that we've all had to drop off, but
no, this is great. So we'll keep the conversation going. We'll answer all of your questions just with the administrative team that's on the line. And then we'll post the FAQs for things that are general, and we'll send the rest of the list to the schools. We thank our DCAC members for joining for us for a part of the morning, and we'll finish the conversation from here with our Facebook Live friends. Have a great day, Mr. Guile. And again, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Have a great day.
All right, and at this time, we now have Ms. Wallace joining us for our instructional portion of the conversation. And as we jump into options 1, 2, and 3 in the hybrid models, the question that we just left Ms. Wallace, and we're going to the very next section of the plan, really was about what learning will look like. Will students be online for 6 hours? And what's this log that parents have to do? I explained it briefly, but if you would like to speak to that, feel free to speak to that directly. And it looks like she's unable to unmute herself, so we'll have to make sure the host ensures that she can be unmuted so she can jump right on in. There you go. And this is Ms. Wallace, our assistant superintendent who oversees teaching and learning.
So I just left elementary principals, and we were having a great conversation about this exact topic. So there is not the expectation that kids would synchronously learn all day, 7 hours a day on their computer. So we were talking about how it can be creatively broken up with other activities and things that can be planned that they can take with them when they leave for their 2 days for the following remote days, so that they will have some activities and lessons that they do offline, so they aren't online for having that screen time for 6 or 7 hours a day. So we are talking through that, and we recognize that our littles especially, but even bigger kids, that's a lot of screen time for kids.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving that reassurance, and we'll add that in the FAQ. All right, team members, I see you're getting questions from Facebook Live, and we know we'll have our associate superintendent joining as well, who oversees secondary momentarily. And so Dr. McDonald or Dr. Gray, any questions for us that have come in from Facebook Live that you want to ask on this topic or other topics for these next 15 minutes or so that we're online?
Yes, so in regards to the section we're on right now with the instructional programs, there's a question about how many hours are required by the state for students to, for their learning. And Ms. Wallace touched base on part of this question. If students aren't able to log into a particular Zoom session, if they're doing remote learning, does that count as an absence?
Looks like her mute has already gone back to mute, so we'll have to try to take her back off mute and leave it off mute. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, Dr. McDonald. Can you repeat that? I was so focused on unmuting my computer.
Sure. So how many hours are required by the state? And if a student is not able to log in to a Zoom session, does that count as an absence?
Okay. So the number of hours of instruction is the same for all kids. It's 1,116 hours a year. And so the expectation is that students who are learning remotely are engaged in learning and learning activities for the same number of minutes as they would be if they were in school that day. But they do not all have to be logged in all day and with that screen time. So that's where some of the asynchronous learning or a learning offline or not during the instructional day might occur. So as long as kids are engaging in the number of minutes of learning within the day that they would normally, or even within the week, that they can, they're given credit for being there for those minutes of the week. And as far as the log, we're looking at different ways in which we might do a log. One might be a Google form that's sent home on Fridays through Advisor Base at the secondary, and something through Seesaw at the elementary, where parents, they can mark, I did my 360 minutes for Monday, or they were absent. Because we do recognize that some kids are still going to be absent on occasion. But the great thing about the remote plan is that they can do the lessons asynchronously, because teachers will be recording the lessons and posting them either in Seesaw or Google Classroom. So students will have access to the full screen time lessons that they may have missed.
We know at this time it's 11:25, and as we prepare to conclude at 11:30, this particular session, if parents would like to see us continue to have dialogue with some of the questions that came in live, we are prepared to fully do that, and we look forward to maybe inviting other parents for just a little fireside chat, as if we're sitting in our living room together talking about concerns and items and things you'd like to see. Here's the challenge for us. We know that we would love to see all of our students. We know that at this time it is unsafe to do so. Therefore, we must abide by the health department guidelines, which restricts the number of students that can come to school. So the plan that we've developed is one that we feel like gives options, but also respects those guidelines. The phased-in approach we do want to speak to as we are in this final 5 minutes. And then if there is a final question that Dr. Gray would like to conclude on, we will answer that. With the phased-in approach, phase one really was initially planned and is still planned to be the remote learning phase. And so the remote learning phase really allows us to teach about the mask wearing, the hand washing, how buildings have changed, the water fountains, what entry to come into. It allows for our counselors to set up mental health groups. But that phase one, we anticipate, we would like to see that phase one to be approximately a week. And if that week needs to be longer, we ask our parents to certainly be patient with us as we look at the health department guidelines and use their guidelines to help determine whether or not it's safe to reopen. Phase two is when we would be bringing back a number of our students. Now, given this is new territory for us, rather than bringing back all the students at the same time and having them on that A-B schedule, we actually anticipate allowing some students to come every day, such as our preschool students. In addition to our preschool students coming every day, those numbers are already 15 or less. And so they certainly have 6 feet social distancing and could do that in their current classrooms. We look as forward as well to making sure other small groups, such as all the alternative schools, that would be Hope Street, Cap City, our alternative schools that are currently in the JAC program, and our alternative school at Avondale West, and TCALC, our specialized college and career program. Those would be in session all week as well. They already have very small groups, and if you split the class into smaller groups, you'd only have 2 or 3 students in school at one time. The phase two, we anticipate bringing back our transition grades. So kindergarten, 6, and 9, those are grades that students are entering school for the very first time in those buildings. And we want those students to come back and to be able to test out all of these new systems we have in place. We certainly will be monitoring that over the course of a week, up to 2 weeks. But we will be monitoring that space, and pending the health department's guidance and allowing us to continue to move into our next phase, we would then move into phase 3. Phase 3 are all of the students returning on that A-B schedule. Now, we are looking at what kinds of childcare services or other services can we possibly partner to provide, or can we provide through our current staff for families that we know will have some issue with this reduced class size restriction. We are still exploring that, and we'll be sharing information with families. If we can make something work that serves all families effectively, but also adheres to these guidelines in a broader and creative way, we're going to do it. So parents, again, please continue to give us grace in terms of that regard. Now, there was a question regarding the notification of phases. We want you to know that the phases overall will hopefully be in place for only about 5 days, up to 10 days. But in terms of moving in forward to a phase or backwards back to a phase, we would like to try to give parents a week's notice. And so at the beginning of the week, letting parents know that the following week, based on the guidelines and the health data that we have at that time, we look forward to moving to the next phase. That's what we would like to do. And again, we're building some of this plane as we're flying it. And so along with using the health department as a guide. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gray on the very final question.
Yes, Dr. Anderson, on the final question on Facebook that we're seeing right now, will there be a cap on class size?
One of the things we shared at the start of this, and we'll be sharing throughout this plan, that the health department is requiring that we have 6 feet between all students, which means classrooms will likely have between 12 to 15 students in a class. And with that, 6 feet social distancing, that's all we will be able to fit in most of our classes. So therefore, yes, there will be a cap. And because of their restriction in that regard and the restriction on buses, we cannot bring all students back with large class sizes or traditionally, regularly 25-1 class sizes. We cannot do that with the 6 feet distancing. So because of that, yes, there is a cap on class size. And it is the reason why we have an alternate hybrid plan. As we close on out, the members of our team, I do want to acknowledge the remaining member of our team that just joined. She was planning with her secondary team, her principals, just as Ms. Wallace was planning with her principals. These are faces you'll continue to see as we have future sessions. So I'll ask Dr. Hackett to introduce herself. And I do see that Dr. McDonald has a question about a future session, and we'll throw that out so everyone that is listening on Facebook Live knows how you can continue to get these kinds of sessions available for you. Dr. Hackett.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Good morning, all. Thank you for being a part of our process as we work to make sure that we are keeping all students safe and we're providing an outstanding experience for our students. Coming back to the Topeka Public Schools is a complete honor for me. I began here at Randolph Elementary, and now I get to work with our superintendent and leadership team as we prepare for another successful year. We're using every available resource to us to make sure that we are thoughtful, we are productive, and we are very positive in our steps going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Hackett. So for secondary questions and for elementary and for high school, Dr. McDonald, I think you did actually have, this really is the final question because it's now 11:32. Dr. McDonald, did you have a question about future sessions? So people who want to learn more can learn more through this venue, if this is a helpful venue for families?
Yes, the question was centered around, could similar sessions be more school or grade based in order to have some more targeted discussions?
We love that. I love that. I said we as a team and spoke for all of us. The more collaboration with your school, the better. So we're going to take this back to our principals. They have not had that suggestion yet. This is something new for us this week. We certainly can have grade-based and school-based. So we will share that with principals. We're meeting with them again on Wednesday. Today, they are putting together their school teams, their school reopen teams. I do know that principals just returned on Wednesday. So they're training on the plan today as it was approved last night at the school board meeting. And so next Wednesday, they'll have their teams put together. They also had their COVID training and they had safety training from the police department regarding COVID responses and how to respond should there be an issue in the building. So next Wednesday when they meet, we will be sharing this question for them regarding them having their own Zoom, Facebook Live sessions for their individual schools regarding reopening and what topics our families might want to learn about. We'll ask our principals to work with their PTO teams as well. So if you're a PTO member, they're going to be calling you anyway, either Monday or Tuesday of next week. And so we encourage our parents to get involved and facilitate conversations so we make this work together. None of us want to be in this space, and we are looking forward to the time when things are more normal than not. But until then, together we're going to move through this space in a way that is most supportive that you'd like to see with the conditions that we have to contend with. Again, thank you so much for your support, cooperation. Stay uplifted, encouraged, and remember to definitely wear your mask wherever you go so that we get through this pandemic and back to school as quickly as possible. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.